Hi, so in the mailbox, this is where I go over any sort of interesting questions or comments that appeared on my videos or direct messages to me in the past 7 days. Sorry it wasn't out yesterday, but I was basically trying to hammer out the patch 7.2.5 videos that I needed to do as that was coming out a week earlier than I'd expected. So getting straight into it, there's sort of three basic themes, or two and a half themes really. In terms of comments, I've lumped it into comments related to patch 7.2.5 stuff, comments related to WoW Travel. I did a really short video on WoW Travel, but it got some interesting comments on there, and then just general ones. So we'll start off with the patch 7.2.5, as that is more controversial or topical, whatever you want to call it, at the moment. So first comment is, I feel like 7.2.5 has way more stuff than 7.2 did. Kind of sad that they label 7.2 as a major patch. Which is an interesting point. It's not one I agree with. I can sort of understand it though. It is a bit weird, and I'll explain why I don't agree with it in a minute. But I can understand this point of view because on one level, you can think about the content for 7.2 being the Broken Shore. And what was the Broken Shore? Well, the Broken Shore was just another set of like dailies. I mean, it's Legion's answer to Tanan Jungle, which, you know, met with groans in Warlords of Draenor because that was just another landmass with more Apexis dailies. Well, this is just another landmass with more of those dailies on it. But it did have other content as well. It had a new dungeon, and, you know, and that's fair enough. We haven't had a mid-expansion dungeon for a little while. And also, it had the Mage Tower Artifact Challenge, and it had the new artifacts on our artifact traits on our artifact as well. And just the reason why I disagree, if I was just, you know, weighing it up and thinking, okay, well, think about the stuff in, because there's about 10 things I could talk about for 7.2.5 that are coming. A lot of it's fairly trivial stuff, but there are things I could talk about, and yeah, there's much fewer things with 7.2, but potentially had more impact. And the way I sort of tally it up, especially doing this channel, is I think to myself, right, there wasn't. Obviously, I did videos about 7.2.5 coming up. If I had the time to have done this, let's say I wasn't working, let's say I was a full-time YouTuber, what would I have done in terms of 7.2.5 content that I didn't do? And the only thing I could really think of is I would have done some videos on the deaths of Chromie. That's the obvious thing to have done. I didn't do that because, you know, time being what it is, I would have had to have played that extensively, pretty much all the way through, and got footage of it, and I wasn't going to put the time into that when I had other things to do. But that's the only thing. So the videos I did do, I did very short ones just to explain what was coming, no real commentary on it. So about new items, new content, and the changes to Mythic Plus Dungeons. You know, and about 1,500 views or 2,000 views for each of those. Then on 7.2, I brought out a video, just one video, on things to do when 7.2 comes out. And that ended up being my most watched video. So it sounds a really, really strange measure, but that's the sort of measure I put to it. There was a lot more interest for the content for 7.2, just in terms of views I got for my video, and I'm a sample of one, I know that, than there has been for 7.2.5. So for that reason, I think it is fair enough that 7.2 was the major content patch. But we're into a new thing now that we haven't had for some years, that 7.2.5, the midway patch, has got new content. It's not just bug fixes, and it's not just changes to things to smooth things out, quality of life improvements. There is actually new content. I think it's just that we've not been used to that for a few years. But that's just my opinion anyway. One was about you. Comment here, you can't change class and farm 19 legendaries before Timo Sargeras anyway, so who cares? This is me talking about people shouldn't read things into sims of how the different classes and specs are performing, like comparisons. I went through in the video a number of reasons for that, because you aren't doing proper comparisons between them. It's not valid. But yeah, this person saying, well, you can't change class and farm 19 legendaries before TOS anyway, so who cares? Doesn't stop people re-rolling. You don't need 19 legendaries either. You need 2. Maybe 3, you know, because, you know, some classes and specs, okay, may change their legends about from fight to fight. I mean, we're probably going to change it about from fight to fight as Ret Paladins. But you don't need that many. Sure, okay, if you're re-rolling or if you've re-rolled in the last couple of weeks, as some people in my guild have, yeah, you're unlikely to have got those BIS legendaries by the time we start. But the other thing to note is, although they're powerful, don't overstate them. The difference between, like, some people look at the DPS increase a particular legendary does, and it's several percent up, they go, oh, that's really big. There's a couple of things about that. Usually when you look at the percentage DPS it gives you, you're comparing it to just a normal piece of equipment. When you compare a medium legendary with the best one, it's not that big. It's not as big a difference as you might think at any rate. For a min-maxer, yeah, it's significant, but it's not as big as you would think. To the point where if you're not playing like a robot, if you make mistakes, in fact, those mistakes and that imperfect play, or imperfect conditions even, because remember, these percentages, you're working out on a sim anyway, and it's a model, not the actual fight you're doing on, can actually be equal to the DPS benefit of the legendary anyway. So I'm not playing down the impact of having the BIS legendaries, but people do exaggerate them. And as I say, it's not stopping people re-rolling. We've got people in our guild re-rolling. And they will do well. They'll be all right. It says you may be able to toggle between 2 specs if your class supports if you farm the best 2 or 3 by now. But yeah, as I say, people are re-rolling right now. Next comment. With how the game is at the moment, it really doesn't matter your spec. Even doing cutting-edge mythic raiding, you can play whatever spec you want. The one you are best at and have best legendaries, will do more DPS than other specs. My guild is 10 out of 10. Our raid team is some of the lowest performing classes like Destro Lock, 1 Fire Mud, blah, 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 blah. Things I agree with, things I disagree with in there, so take it apart bit by bit. It says, in terms of the fact that you will see these, what are considered more poorly performing specs on bosses and can do 10 out of 10, yes, this is true. But there's 2 things about that. First of all, some guilds will be okay with players playing those less than ideal specs, and they're likely to lag a little bit behind, even if they do pretty well. I mean, you could get a guild that, say, gets rank 100, but if they were playing all the best specs, everything, they'd be maybe rank 70 or something. But that's not the really key thing. The really key thing is not that you can't do it. You absolutely can do it. It's that if you are, however, playing the best classes and specs, then you get far more choice of guild. So you might have a player of a particular level of skill. And let's say there's 2 classes, A and B. And A is very much in demand. It's doing really well in this particular tier. And class B, it's like, you can take it, sure. If that player is capable of doing the mechanics, you will be able to do it. But they don't particularly bring anything to the table. They don't allow you to trivialize any mechanics. Like, for example, rogues soak in, I don't know, the soul well on Gul'dan or the stuff on Tichondrius. The name has completely gone out of my head at the moment. I've just been doing it as well. Or, if you're like a tank and you're a warrior tank, you're decent, sure. But like a brewmaster tank also negates a couple of mechanics on certain fights. So yeah, if you play class B and you play well and you can do the mechanics, you will be fine. But class A is the one that gets to, circumvent certain mechanics. So, and those 2 players are looking around for a guild, scratching around for a guild. Player A is the one who, even if they are not that brilliant, can get themselves into a pretty high performing guild because they need that class and there's not enough of them. Player B, they're going to have to fit into a guild much lower down. So you do yourself more favours. Not that I am suggesting that people keep trying to roll this flavour of the month, because that doesn't work out. Because one thing I definitely do agree with in here is the one that you are best at. In fact, more specifically, the one you enjoy the most will be the one you're best at, and you'll do the most DPS with that if you're a DPS. You will. That's an absolute fact. Because you need a high degree of understanding. I mean, to play at my level, I'm far from the best, bloody hell. And yet I understand almost everything about my spec, in quite good detail. Doesn't mean to say I always show it in fights. I'm capable of making mistakes, but I do understand it. And at my level, there's plenty that outperform me. And you can only get that level of understanding if you really, really enjoy that spec, because it takes an amount of time to learn about it, even if you're getting it from other people, but also test things out for yourself. So there's a time investment in learning to play well, and you won't really do it if you don't enjoy it. So yeah, there's something there I agree with, and there's something that I don't. And the last one in this little topic, class comparisons are not pointless. So I was saying about class comparisons pointless, of course, comparing those charts. It says the general playstyle and use of a spec doesn't change most of the time. Well, there's two things there. First of all, that second point has got nothing to do with the first. The reason why the class comparisons are pointless is because the results that you see on a chart, and I was looking at one yesterday, is not valid. In fact, the people we were looking at with some of whom were theory crafters who work on SimCraft, they're saying, well, you know, this module's ready. This module isn't ready, because that's the thing. They're all done by different people. Some people are quicker to get them ready than others. So someone produces a chart. Some of them are not even ready. Some of them, I mean, I had some people post in the comments, which is perfectly valid. Some of the classes and specs, they don't actually really advise using the SimCraft for them, because there's too many things that don't fit. Because remember, SimCraft is a model for a fight, but it's not perfect. It's not absolutely modeling any given fight perfectly. It's just that if you know what you're doing with it, you can model aspects of fights and to give yourself some useful information. Whereas some of those classes and specs don't really. And that's the point here. You can use SimCraft to see, say, which bits of gear might be better under certain circumstances for a particular class or spec, as long as it's not bugged and as long as it's a reasonably good model. But comparing one class with another doesn't really work, because there are subtleties to fights. Like, for example, if there's a bit of movement or target switching, some classes will be able to cope better with that than others. If there's some lag, some will cope better than that with others. If there's some just natural latency, your connection isn't all that great, then some will cope with that better than others. You know, again, we can talk about if you've got a fight that's essentially single target, but every now and then some ads come in. Well, you can model Beast Lord. That's a good type of fight. But, you know, you can't tune to like the regularity of it and how many mobs and stuff like that with SimCraft. You get some options to change the model, but you're not in great detail. That's what I was quite liking about the Ask Mr. Robot one when we were sort of looking at it in beta, but unfortunately the results are not that reliable. So yeah, so it's the fact that they're wrong. But then the other point about saying the general playstyle and use of a spec doesn't change most of the time. Has this person just come out of a coma? It's changed a lot. It changes a lot anyway. Usually what changes the playstyle of a spec throughout an expansion is the different set bonuses. Set bonuses have a tangible effect on the way you play the class. If you're not changing the way you're playing the class to some extent, when you get different set bonuses, then you have to wonder if you're playing it properly. But in Legion, it's not just set bonuses that have changed it. Many things, you know, they've actively changed things. They've completely reworked talents for some classes. They've completely reworked other core abilities as well. They've not been afraid. I mean, that took me by surprise, I have to say. Because I was thinking, you know, at the point where Legion launches, whatever state it's in at the start, because that's traditionally been the case. They don't really change it throughout an expansion. They might buff and nerf some abilities, but they don't change the way they work. They only changed your playstyle from set bonuses, but that is significant enough. Whereas now they've actually been changing it. So in Legion, the general playstyle and use of a spec absolutely changes. But anyway, that's the 7.2.5 stuff. The WoW travel theme. So I did a bit of a short video on, I was thinking it might be more interesting in the pre-flight phase, given that we're now accepting that we're going to have at least 9 months without flying, and that's for people who farm the flying achievements really quickly when it does come out, that it might be nice if we could at least interact with the environment a bit more. There are some people who just want to fly around, but there are other people who want to fly because it's too inconvenient on the ground. And I was thinking of things like if we could climb the rocks and with the grapples, you know, if we had things that we can put into suitable types of terrain, without having to have fixed points where we do it from. In other words, do what you would expect a person to be able to do. Not climb sheer cliff faces like Spider-Man, but do what you would expect within reasonable human capabilities, especially as a fantasy game as well. You can make it a little bit superhuman, but still, like, so rock climbing and getting ropes that you stake into the ground and can climb down heights and stuff like that. That sort of thing, it would make it more role-playing as well, from my view. So anyway, a few comments on this. The first one was, your ideas might be difficult to implement. So far, they've been able to implement only characters jump into some location. Warriors, leap, rogues, grappling hook, talent, stuff like that. That's only because that's all they've tried to do. I mean, what I'm basing my ideas on are games that exist. I used some footage in that video from Black Desert Online. So there's a game that does it. So I'm not saying it wouldn't be a significant investment of resources to be able to produce it, because at the very least it would not just require a change in the way the characters work, but presumably the environment as well. So I don't know how feasible it would be. It might be one of those things where you could only introduce it for the new zone. A bit like when TBC came out, we had flying for the new zones and we didn't have flying for the earlier zones, and maybe that's the way it works. Or maybe they just don't want that. And then the next part of the comment from this person was, I'm pro flying, it saves loads of time and you can focus on actual gameplay. Or you could argue that travelling is gameplay. It depends what you mean. I'm not arguing against flying, by the way. I'm just saying that we should have better ways of getting around than flying. It says, yes, some YouTubers complain that people don't care about the journey anymore. Oh, I wonder who you're talking about there. Well, there is a journey in games like Skyrim because you can stumble upon something interesting during your travels. This is a really, really good point. It says, to quote a classic here, where is the interesting cave, Iron? But then the argument can come that if there were no flying, there would be more impetus. In fact, there'd be more motivation on the designers to come up with interesting terrain where you discover things. Think about it this way. Where they were planning to not have flying, and that decision was made very late on, by the way. Don't think that WoD and Legion were designed with, no, there's not going to be flying in mind. They were deciding very late on, they said. They did make the terrain much more interesting. There are things to search for that they just wouldn't have bothered with when flying was a thing. Because you look at the environment in, I would say after TBC, certainly, like Wrath, Cataclysm, especially Cataclysm, and MOP, I would definitely say the terrain was noticeably featureless. Largely, it looked pretty enough. I'm not saying they just made it drab, but in terms of interesting terrain, from a point of view of traversing it, there was no interest to it at all. There was no obstacles to try and get around or working out how to get from A to B. There was none of that. And you can argue from the designer's point of view, remember, when they're building this game, they're always going to be pushed for time. It's always about what can you get done, what can you get done. Why would you spend time when you know you're up against these tight deadlines, putting things into the game that you know full well, if they don't see it while they're leveling, they ain't going to see it, or they ain't going to appreciate it. And it's like, why come up with this like puzzle type terrain where they've got to really work out how they're going to get from A to B, because it's not easy, when actually in a couple of days' time they're just going to buy flying and fly up to it. They wouldn't. So although I'm not going to say that in WoD and Legion we've got super interesting, I think we've got more interesting terrain. But yes, you're right. We haven't got the sort of terrain that really lends itself to non-flying content. If we didn't have flying, let's just say for the sake of argument, like I say, I'm not advocating it at all. The genie's out of the bottle. You've got to keep it in now. Then the motivation from the designers, it would be worth them putting in much more interesting terrain for us to actually go exploring. That's my view on that one. Now, next one. It says, personally, I feel like I am exploring the map more than I did when I didn't have flying. Before I had flying, I just flew to closest flight point. Then I used combination of toys to get to its world quest and use class hall portal. We don't all have that. I didn't think or look around or anything. This may be true for some people, but again, it's not actually an experience I share, I have to say, but I can understand that point of view. But again, it goes back to the earlier thing. That's because they know that flying's going to come in at some point. Why put in a load of stuff? They put in some stuff because they know that you're going to have about 9 months where you're not going to have flying. So it's now in their interest to put in some effort. But again, we don't have the stuff in the game that forces you to really look around and think, because why would you? Like if we had climbing, let's say we had rock climbing or something like that in the game, you would then. Because now what happens is you realise you've got to get from there to there. It's like, oh, I'll just find the road that takes me there, because there has to be a road, because we have no other way of getting around. If we come to an obstacle, if we can't jump over it, we've got to ride around it. So you just find the roads and the tracks and the trails in WoW. That's the way it works. But what if there was no road? What if you had to get up there, that precipice there, and there was no road leading to it, no track leading to it, nothing? You had to get there by climbing the rocks. Not jumping from rock to rock either, actually climbing them. And let's say there was some effort required to do that, not just again like going up like Spider-Man. Then that would be a bit more interesting. Then you might have to consider, is it better to go that way around or that way around, like a real rock climber might? That would add more interest to it. It might, for some people who can't be arsed with it, add more frustration as well. There is that possibility, which is why it's just an opinion of mine. The last one, it says, I don't mind WoW travel at all. I just hope we never get portals like in Guild Wars 2 and other games. That's the dumbest thing you can have in an MMO. What's the point of an MMO if you don't roam the world or meet random players? I'll take that one first. There are quite a lot of portals in WoW. I've not played Guild Wars 2, so I don't know if that's like portals ex machina. But what I would say is this phrase here, I just hope we never get portal. Like, we have a lot of portals in WoW. In Dalaran, you have portals to the major alliance or horde cities, depending on which side you're on. You also have portals like in the middle bit to other places as well. In Suramar, we have portals to lots of parts of Suramar. For certain classes, you also have instant portals to your class 4. And we have multiple Hearthstones. We have a Dalaran Hearthstone. We have a Garrison Hearthstone. And we have another Hearthstone we can put wherever we like, or as long as it's got an inn. I would say there's a lot of portals in World of Warcraft. A lot. That's so. I don't know what Guild Wars 2 must be like then, in terms of what you're saying there. And then it says, about Whistle and Flight achievement, both are great solutions compared to previous expansions. I hope we'll stay in the same future. I very much approve of them, I have to say. Yes, the Whistle I think was a good idea, and I think it was also a good idea to, first of all, make it so you had to get those reps. That was a good idea, because it meant you didn't miss out a whole zone. You had to sort of do at least the basic storylines. And I also approved of the fact that after a while, they made it account-wide. I'm fine with it not being account-wide at the start of the expansion, but being account-wide a few months later, that seemed good to me. And the idea, if you're going to have flying, that the Blizzard done this compromise where it's not going to be right at the start of the expansion, it's going to be as it was this time, about 9 months in, roughly. I can't remember exactly what it was. Then, yeah, I also support that as well. Right, on to some general ones. So, get more WoW kitchen episodes. I really want to. I do. And it's not that I can't think of which ones more to do. I've got a list of ones. But I'm a bit messy. I have been spending so much time on lots of things recently. So in terms of demands on my time, obviously I'm a teacher. As a job has quite a lot of demand on it. Aside from that, then, since January, my sort of World of Warcraft antics have been more than just being a raider. I've also been an officer now with recruitment and all that, and it has not been easy going, and that has taken a lot of my time as well. And then, of course, there's YouTube and doing all the other things on it. So my time has actually been really used up, which is good. I actually like my time to be used up. I don't like sitting around. I'm fine sitting as long as I'm doing something. I don't like sitting around being passive. So like the idea of having my feet up and watching telly and stuff like that, I very rarely do that. I don't watch telly ever. I occasionally watch a DVD. But even then, I have my laptop downstairs in the lounge I can be typing stuff out as well, and ideas and plans. or just on Discord at least, having some conversation. But yeah, so it's good in a way that I fill my time up with that. But the problem with that is when you're someone like me who doesn't like being passive and therefore likes to fill their time up with stuff, is then when there's an extra thing you want to do, it's like squeezing it in. But the main problem is not the time as such, it's the fact that I am a bit messy and my kitchen's a bit of a mess. So I need to tidy it up. I don't like domestication. For me is I don't like it. I have to do it. I keep on top of it just about. So what I need to do is to tidy it up and clean it up. So as soon as I get that done, so that I've got an area where I can film again, then I will get back onto that. It won't ever be more frequently than every 2 weeks, I would have thought anyway, because that was the original plan. I should have had a right load out by now. And I do have a significant list, as I say. It's not that I can't think of ideas. I have a list of quite a lot of them. But yes, I want to do those as well. Next one. I put this in simply because it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know what this one is. Shovel Knight. I sort of thought I knew what that meant. And then it said, no, I never played it, comma, I am drunk. And then there was a follow-up quite soon after. Latin words non sequitur literally means it does not follow. That is certainly true of that statement. Yes. Right, anyway, next one. This was a comment. I can't remember what video it was now. But it's just a comment I threw out because it triggered something in me. Not to do with the poster. It says, you said when someone is really far behind, they usually do something about it in terms of balance. What I was saying is, particular classes of a particular role tend not to be left too far behind. You can look at a list of how people are doing. Even if you look at Warcraft log stats, which are actual numbers, although even that, you can read more into that than is actually there. That can be misleading sometimes. But, you might have someone way out at the top because something's a bit broken. You might have someone way down the bottom. But usually, even though there's a ranking as such, they're pretty close together. And if they're not, Blizzard tend to do something about that. If there's an individual spec that's way behind, they may not. If that class has access to another one, realistically that is, we do understand, I think Blizzard do as well, that you don't expect a feral druid, if they're bad, to play Boomkin, and you don't expect an elemental shaman if they're bad to play enhancement, because melee and range are different. But if you're a fury warrior and fury's bad, then you would be expected to just go arms or something like that. Some people don't like doing that, but that is a reasonable expectation. It's nice, of course, if Blizzard can balance everything, but if they have to choose what to balance, balancing classes is more important than balancing individual specs, where you've got multiple choices for a given role. But anyway, so it says, so you said when someone is really far behind, they'll usually do something. I hear feral druids are really far behind and have been for some time. Why haven't they done anything? Because they're not. It's the evidence I have. I'm not a feral druid. We have a feral druid in our guild. He's almost always at the top of damage. If not at the top, then very close to top. Granted, our particular feral druid is an exceptional one. So there is that. So what you then do is you go, okay, the one in our guild is either, if you look at there and they're always at the bottom of the meters, doesn't necessarily mean the class is bad. It might be they are. And if they're at the top of the meters, doesn't mean to say the class is good. It might be that they are. So then what you do is you go to Warcraft logs and you look at the stats, and you see that actually feral druids are quite close to the top. They're not right at the top, but they're pretty close to the top. They're well above middling. So that's what I would say about that one. But the reason I picked this one out is because it did get into the back of my head. Because this is why, one of the reasons why I started doing YouTube in the first place, I started doing guides. Because what I really don't like is when people, and this actually I ought to put this comment in first, because this is related. Someone said here, picking up a spec and making a guide on it is really easy. There's so much information you can just regurgitate and take credit for, and the game isn't complicated anyway. If the game wasn't complicated, then everyone would be at the same level. The fact that everyone is not at the same level means that is demonstrably untrue. So straight away I'm going to disagree with that. I don't even see that as being a matter of opinion. If it was not like Snakes and Ladders isn't complicated. If 100 people each play 100 games of Snakes and Ladders, you'll all even out and get roughly the same number of wins and losses, because that's not complicated. It's also not skill based. This, you don't. There's a huge range, even amongst people who actually take the time and effort to learn how to play the game, there is a huge range. So you can't really say that. But this thing about making the game, it's the fact that some people do this. They read something on the forum. Oh, I'll just do a video of that. And they hit a training dummy for 5 or 10 minutes. And you learn nothing. And actually some of the stuff they say is just wrong because they've misunderstood it or just don't care. And that's what made me want to do some guides in the first place, which is why I'd always be mortified if I did something wrong in it. But one of the things that hit me last year was, and what really got me riled up, because this was really all part of it, is when Icy Veins first put out their Rhett guide last summer. It's better now. It's got someone on it who now actually plays Rhett. But at the time, it was put together by someone who clearly doesn't play Rhett. They just don't. Because what they put out was wrong. And I don't just mean a little bit wrong, like, oh, they got that, oh, they have not really kept up. I mean, it was completely wrong. It was Noxic level wrong. And I threw a proper wobbly at it. So big a wobbly, in fact, that, it created a right shitstorm. And Icy Veins were forced to, like, immediately deal with it. They got someone else to sort of make it better, like, immediately, because this was getting such bad publicity. And one of the points I made at the time was, you can imagine a situation where someone's learning to play a spec and they go to a guide. Sensible. That's what more people should do, actually. People shouldn't necessarily expect to learn the whole thing themselves. Some people are better at that than others. But you can always learn something from someone else, even if it's only a minor little thing. But anyway, so they go to a guide and they read up and they play like that. And then let's say they do really badly, they're performing really badly. And you can imagine their guild thinking, well, this is a good player. In the last expansion, they did really well. Now they're doing really badly. And they're saying, well, follow this guide. Oh, Icy Veins. Oh, well, that's really, that's a really big website. It must be reliable. Oh, it says it was written by this guy in, like, Serenity or Method or whatever it was. I can't remember now. It was a very, very top guild. Oh, must be good. And so they'll never question the guide, and they'll not question the player because they know the player's good from previous expansion, but they're performing very badly. So what do? They blame the class. They blame the spec. And that's just what I was thinking about here, because I was thinking to myself, if you actually look at the situation, their Feral Druids are not performing badly. So why do they think they are? Is it because they're following a bad guide and they're not getting the results? Could be that. Anyway, that's my little aside. It just triggers me, that sort of thing. Next one, it says, by heroism, do you mean bloodlust? No, I mean heroism. I've never really thought about it until very recently, because it just calls it heroism, because that's what it was. When Shamans, I was always Alliance, when Shamans appeared on the Alliance side in TBC, they had this thing called heroism. Great. And it was, I'd never even thought about it, never even occurred to me, because people in Alliance guilds will call for hero, even though most of the time, realistically, it's probably a time warp from like a mage. It can be heroism from a shaman. You just call it hero. Oh, hero, when are we going to hero? Blah, 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 heroism. And then when I was in a Horde guild last year, for about a year, I would say the same things at times. I would go, when are we using hero? And sometimes they would keep saying, don't you mean bloodlust? No. I knew it was called bloodlust. I was just yanking their chain. But, as an Alliance player, for me, it's just always been heroism. It was heroism at the time when I didn't know what bloodlust even was. I'd not played Horde. I'd played a couple of Horde characters in vanilla, but it's like level 10. So yes, it's just heroism for me. That's all. I know that's all I always call it. You'll just have to get used to it. There are several things that you'll have to get used to on my channel. First of all, it's heroism or hero. Second of all, it's artifact. And third of all, it's alt. All there is to it. Anyway. And I think that's it for this week. So, I hope you found that interesting. As I say, I'll do this each week. Usually it'll be on a Sunday. As I say, yesterday I was really rammed with it. I was tearing my hair out. I did a full day worth of video creation and editing. I was knackered at the end of it. But it'll be back to Sunday, hopefully next week. And don't forget, 7.2.5 is coming out this reset. That also means that although the raid isn't coming out, so whatever we're doing in Nighthold will be with new abilities. So make sure you've read up on your own classes and specs. And It's your last chance to really try those out before you're also having to try out any new abilities in a new raid as well. So good luck there, and until next time, I'll see you later.